Hello CIS27. In this video, I'm going to talk about Unit 7 Lab. And in Unit 7 Lab, you will be working with firewall rules and policy. So we will go ahead and click the link here, and this will take you to Practice Lab. So in Practice Lab, just real quick inventory. If you have issues with your grade, make sure you check out the lab report. Okay, and when you click the paperclip with the sheet and click lab report, it will tell you what kind of completion that you would have, whether you completed or currently did not finish. It will show in progress. So this will allow you to look at your lab report, and also if later on when you do the practice test, it will show you the exam prep report. And if you want to look at different type of assessment, you can go to here and you can select the ones that is chosen for your course. So coming back to lab 7, in this lab, it's really addressing the firewall, and you will be using numerous virtual machines. So in the first exercise, you will be configuring Windows Firewall, and in this you will be using 2 virtual machines. So make sure that BDC01 is on, and that automatically turn on when you start your practice lab. And you will need to turn on your Windows 10. So make sure that you power on Windows 10. And to start with the step 1, you will be using lab BDC01, which is the server. And once the server is on, you will see the management right here, the server manager. However, it tells you in practice lab that you need to click on the Windows button. Okay, so if you right click the Windows Start button, you're going to see a menu, and in that you can click on Command Prompt. So in Command Prompt, you will be pinging plab win 10, that will be Windows 10. So when you ping, what will happen is if the virtual machine is on, you should receive 4 replies. And when you use the ping command, as we've seen in some of the last lab, but in this one, we are using the Windows computer name. So you can ping using the computer name, or you can ping using the IP address. Now, ultimately, it will take that name and will translate it to the IP address, which is what you can see in the screenshot given there. Then in the next task, you're going to create Windows Firewall rule. And in the lecture, I mentioned that we need to really set up the firewall to really protect. And if you're using the native Windows Firewall, you can set up inbound and outbound traffic. So in your Windows 10, you can simply search for Windows Firewall, and it would show up like this. Another way that we can access this is through Control Panel. And so in your Windows 10, you can search for Windows Firewall, which will show here, where you can go into advanced security setting, or at home, if you wanted to use your Windows Firewall, you can search for that, or you can use Control Panel. And Control Panel will give you system security. If you click on your security and maintenance, actually, I'm sorry, you can go back and look at Windows Firewall under System and Security. You can find that there. And as you notice, if it shows X like this with the red, that means that the network, you need to pay attention to what it tells you here. The domain and the network firewall is inactive. So on the left hand side of your control panel, usually you would see a link and it would show your Windows Firewall on or off. So you can click this option and you can choose to turn it on or off. So that's one way of approaching or going through and reconfigure your Windows Firewall. Now in the lab, it tells you to simply search for it on Windows 10, and it's still going to take you to the same place, whether you use the search option or you use Control Panel. And Control Panel allows us to manage our system, our Windows system, especially Control Panel will be useful for your client desktop like Windows 10. So here in the instruction, it tells you to look at the Windows Firewall. And on the screenshot, you can see that that will be the path, is to Control Panel, System Security, and Windows Firewall. Then what you need to do is you need to change the setting. And here is where you can specify to allow the app to communicate with the Windows Firewall. So by default, a lot of the time when you do installation, you get a little pop-up window saying, do you allow this, right? That's part of the Windows Firewall feature. So here you can change the setting on how you can remove or allow a certain apps in the domain, in the private, or in the public area. So if you want to allow another app, you can click the Allow Another App button. So in this step, you would locate files in printer sharing and allow programs feature. Okay, so make sure that you follow the step. And so that will be this option here. Then you will click the link, turn Windows Firewall on or off. And this would allow you to customize the setting for your Windows Firewall. So ideally, for the regular user, we want to turn on Windows Firewall for domain network settings. That means that inside our network, we also want to turn on Firewall for private and public. Now, in some cases, if you're using certain security tools for ethical hacking or assessment purposes, sometimes security tools does not work well with Windows Firewall, so you have to turn that off, otherwise it blocks it. Now, if you're using security software application like anti-malware that comes in a package with other security features, those also act as firewall when it filters, so you can turn that off. So those are host-based protection software. And if you're using security tools, like tools that you want to assess your Windows system, Firewall tends to block that, or your security application will block that. Okay. So in the lab, it shows you how you can turn on your Windows Firewall, and then you can test your firewall rule. So in task 3, you need to use the server, and then you can ping the lab Windows 10 again. Now, as you ping in this step, it times out because you have disabled the ICMP when you turn on the Windows Firewall, and it blocks the ping traffic. So that means it shows that it's timeout instead of getting a reply in this step. Then next, you're going to reconfigure the rule, and Firewall is effective if you reconfigure the rules. And so here it shows you the step on you are going to go back and do the file printer sharing to ensure that domain, private, and public check boxes are enabled. So we were going to check the options for our file and printer sharings. Now that will allow the system to be able to share printer with other system and share file with other system. If you disable this option, the firewall will not allow the system to share printer or file. When we share printer, that means that we can share print driver, right? We can connect to a certain printer that would be shared across multiple systems. And when you're on a peer-to-peer environment, it'll just treat it as all peers are equal. But when you're in a domain, like if you have a server that's controlling the system, then you would use a print server to be able to share that print resource. And print server allows you to manage print queues, and you can also cancel print job and print queues. So now in the next step, you will ping again. And when we ping, we also see that after we allow print and file sharing, it should allow us to ping successfully with the replies. Make sure that we take the screenshot, don't forget. And that's the end of page 2. In exercise 2, you are going to use advanced security setting. So in any time that you reconfigure, notice that we are always verifying connection. And we can verify connection by using command prompt, like in the last 2 exercises, you would ping. And if you disable ping, you can also, through Windows, you can look at your network information. So in the server, the way that you look at the network configuration is through Network and Sharing Center. And that's on the right hand side. So if it's hiding, make sure that you click the arrow to expand it. Okay. So if we go back to our server here, you notice that on the right side, right, when you click it, you have to click the little button, and then you would see the network settings. If you don't, the little arrow will not show. Then here is where you would be able to click the Network Sharing Center. And this is what would be the area that you need to select. And so if we wanted to look at the configuration for the server, you would look at the interface, which is the Ethernet 3. Okay. So in the lab, it tells you to go to the Network Sharing Center. And then what you need to do is you need to look at click on Windows Firewall on the lower left pane. So it's going to look similar to your Windows 10 as Microsoft designed Windows Firewall to look all the same across the OS for the modern Windows operating system. So you would also see on the left hand side is the link where you can turn your Windows Firewall on or off. And by default, we usually would see with the fresh installation it should be on, but in this case it shows that your server have the domain networks on, private networks on, and public or guest network on. Then you would return to your Windows 10 system. You're going to click the Start Windows button, and you can search for CMD, which takes you to command prompt. And you're going to right click it and run as administrator, because this allows you to have an elevated privilege as administrator, so that way you can run additional command compared to the regular user. So once you open command prompt as administrator, again, in this case, we are going to ping the server. So we wanted to verify the connection by pinging a system, and you can ping it by a system name, or you can ping it by an IP address. So when you ping, that's going to send a request from your Windows 10 to the server. So in the last two exercises, you were pinging from the server to Windows 10. Now we are going to go in reverse. Now, as it is connected, you would see that it would respond. You should receive 4 reply, as it would send 4 packets, 4 requests to the server. So if we do scan a network at that point, we would see echo request 4 times with echo reply 4 times. Now, the next part is when you would create your firewall rule, and going back to your system security settings. So keep in mind that after you get the response, you are still on the server, and what you need to do is you are going to get into the advanced security setting on the server. So make sure that you're configuring this on the server now for task 2 in exercise 2. And then here is where you're going to set up the rules. So the firewall would filter incoming traffic or requests and outgoing requests. So the inbound rules are for incoming. And so what you've done in the last exercise, you changed the configuration for Windows 10, but now you're doing it on the server. So here is where you would set the inbound rules. And you would see the inbound rules listed there. And if you right click a specific rule, you can actually look at the properties. Then in the property, it tells you to look at the option enable, and you wanted to check that. Now with the rules, you can also take a look at the other tabs. So the other tabs just tells us about the services, the port that would relate to that rule. And so if you want to be specific, if you want to block a certain port, you can look at the port information that's provided for that rule. And so in the general tab, it will tell you if you enable and then block connection, it's simply block the connection. Now, if you allow the connection, if you wanted to whitelist or white filter, then we can select the other option there. And if you wanted to blacklist, then this is when we block. So if you want to filter out and prevent a certain thing coming in, then we want to block the connection. So in the next portion, we would see that now we would look at the file printer sharing. And on the left-hand side, you would see the inbound rules. Okay. And if you ever wanted to create a new rule, you can see that on the right-hand side. And the new rule would be categorized under either inbound, outbound, or connection security rules. So you can set up a certain type of rule right here, or if you want to look at existing rules, you would look at the container for the inbound or outbound rules or the rules that you have set up. Then after task 2 and task 3, you would test the rule, and just rule of thumb, when after you configure your firewall, whether it's appliance for software, we wanted to test the rules. And so that means that we want to have a connection and to see if the rule is allowed or disallowed with the test. So in the step 1, you would then use Windows 10 to ping the server. In step 2, you would look at the timeout response where it's not going to reply as it blocked it. Okay, so you would have request timeout. And that would show on your Windows 10. So that means that it did not allow ping. Then again, we are going to reconfigure the inbound rules. And then we are going to allow instead of block this time. So we're going to choose the allow option. And after that, when you test, you should be able to ping. Now, we sometimes don't want the system to ping across the network. So a way that you can do that is to turn on or off or disable or enable the rules for ICMP in both type of address. So when you look at the ICMP version 4, that will be for IP version 4 address like 192.168.0.x. The IP version 6, that will be using ICMP v6. So if you disable v4 and leave v6 open, attacker can potentially ping using version 6. So if you disable, you want to make sure that you disable both, right? And in most cases, if the administrator wants to disable, they just don't want their system to be pinged. Because if you can ping, that means it would be able to respond as it is connected, and ping can be used for attacks. So sometime you can set the rules to be disabled. Now, if you wanted to test connection, you can enable it real quick, test it, and then you can just change the rule back. So this shows you on how you can enable and disable your inbound rule that's coming into your system. In step 4, you would then ping the server again after you enable that. And after you enable it, you should see that it's showing 4 requests being successfully replied. Okay. So if you disable and block, it's going to time out. When you enable, it's going to respond successfully. Next, in exercise 3, you would then configure firewalls for remote desktop. And remote desktop in Windows uses RDP, remote desktop protocol. So a way that you can set up remote desktop, it shows you here, you can search for it. And that will take you to remote desktop configuration. So you want to put in the destination system name or IP. You can use an IP address here, but in the lab it shows you that you can use a system name. So from your Windows 10, we want to connect to the server by putting in its name. And as you connect, you need to authenticate to the server. So you will have to log in with the credential that allows you to connect with the proper password. And that might take a few seconds to connect. And in the case of, if you wanted to connect to another system at home, right, as long as that system allows it and it's on the same network, you should be able to do that. In step 5 now, that when after you successfully connect, you would see the remote window showing the desktop of the server. So it's going to look like you're on the server now. Okay, and it shows this, your server information. So once you successfully connect, it would show that. Okay, and it shows the desktop. Then what you would do is once you're on the remote desktop, then you can access it. So in that, what you will need to do is you will need to create the rule. So in this task, you create a firewall rule to block the server from responding to any ping requests. So again, we are going to set up the server right through the remote system. So remember, we're not clicking on the server itself, but in your Windows 10 remote desktop, which shows the server is where you would configure. And most administrator would work remotely for some part right now, especially. So they would connect to their server via internet connection and firewall, and then they would be able to configure or change settings. So after you had set up for block connection and enable block through the remote desktop server, then what you're going to do is you are going to go back to your Windows 10 desktop, and you're going to try to check to see if it's going to be able to respond. Okay. Now, when you exit out of the remote session, it's going to say this. It's going to continue to run after you get off. So we can get out of the session there. And then we can also verify the firewall rule. In your Windows 10, then again, you're going to ping your server. Notice that we already set up the block. So you should receive unsuccessful ping or timeout like this. Okay. So when you block that rule or block that traffic by setting that rule, it's gonna show that it's gonna time out. Then again, you are gonna reconnect to the remote desktop and reconnect to the server. And once you're on the server desktop through the remote session, then you are gonna change the rule again. Okay. So in this step, it shows you you're gonna have to change this for the file printer sharing. Then after you change it, then you are going to ping the server again from your Windows 10. Okay. Then after you change it to allow, you would then get a successful reply from the server. Make sure we take a screenshot at the end of page 4. Then in exercise 5, you are going to verify the block ping packet. So in the server system now, go ahead and go back to your network sharing center. Go back to your firewall. And checking your settings is enabled or your firewalls turn on. And then again, we are going to look at your file and printer sharing. We're going to block the connection, click OK. In Windows 10, we're going to ping it. Okay, so now we block it again, and it should show timeout. In task 2, you would then use command line. So in your server, what you're going to do is you're going to use the command line to configure the server firewall. So in this, just like what you've done before, what you're going to do is you are going to use netsh. And when you run this command, what that does is it's going to turn your firewall on, turn it off. And once you enter that, you are going to enter OK. So this allows us to use the command in command prompt to turn the advanced setting of your firewall, the profile of it, to the state off. Once we turn it off, we would see it red like this instead of green. And then after we turn it off, we're going to ping the server from your Windows 10. Don't forget, right? We need to use the other system to ping. And when you turn it off, when you ping, you should get successful reply. So what we see from this is if the rule is enabled to block for file and printer sharing, we're unable to ping. If we turn the firewall off, then we would ping successfully. If we change the rule to allow file printer sharing, we would also receive successful result for ping. Then you would use command prompt again. And so in your server, open command prompt and you're going to issue this command and you're going to turn it back on. And after that, you confirm with OK. Then you would see that the firewall state is going to be green when you look at the interface. And once you turn it on, when you ping now, it should block it again. So it should time out in your ping. So in your Windows 10, then you're going to ping your server and it should show timeout. Okay. So that would be exercise 4. And then what you need is make sure that you submit your screenshots throughout. And once you do that, you can turn off your virtual machine and then click done. And this concludes my video for CIS27 Unit 7 lab, which we work with firewall rules in Windows 10 and the server, Windows Server operating system. It shows you how to use advanced security settings, to use remote access to reconfigure and access the server through remote desktop, and also using command prompt. Thank you for watching this video. I will see you in the next video.